found Tanith Lee when I was probably about 14 or 15, something like that. I was pretty young. I tend to think I was probably a freshman in high school. At the time, there was no internet. I lived in southern Indiana, so there was no really the bookstores were minimal, and I it was hard to get anymore where even if there had been a bookstore. And to add to it all, my mom was afraid of the highway at the time, and so we never drove out of town to go to anywhere else. So I was a member of the Science Fiction Book Club of America, and besides the library, that's where I got most of my fiction. Um, and Tanith Lee came through that book club. I came across all sorts of authors, but she is one of the ones I don't think I would have found if not for that.
I'm a late bloomer. So for me, Tanith Lee is it's all about fairy tales and folklore when it comes to Tanith Lee for myself. I was in my 20s and I had been reading Terry Windling, Terry Windling's work. She and Ellen Datlow started a series of fairy tales for adults. White as Snow, Red as Blood is a series of 6 anthologies, and Tanith had several in those books. And I was on a forum with Heidi Heiner at Sur La Lune Fairy Tales back in the day in the 90s, late 90s. And Terry Windling was talking about Snow White. Terry Windling published a series of novels that were based on fairy tales, and Tanith Lee's White as Snow was one of those fairy tales. And so she was talking about that, and I had interactions with her and several other people on the forum, and we were talking about Snow White. And I mentioned that I thought it was quite similar to Beloved, the whole idea, the mother-daughter relationship, wanting to own, wanting to keep, wanting to imbibe. And so it was under my other different name, but I was in the introduction, and Terry, and she quoted me in the introduction to White as Snow. So that was my first experience of Tanith Lee, was the White as Snow, the novel that she wrote, and also the fairy tales that she wrote for Ellen Datlow and Terry Windling's fairy tale series.
I'm just going to throw in the books I actually read, which I didn't include, which was The Sisters Grimmer, which was the short fiction, The Electric Forest, and The Silver Metal Lover. Those were the 3 that I read first. So I think we have very different Tanith Lee backgrounds, but I don't think that's unusual.
Yeah, I mean, she's written so many that it's not surprising that people come from all different aspects of her career. And you mentioned Terry Windling, and I believe she is a part of this project as well, which is very exciting. So it's great that you guys come from different backgrounds. And I like how you said you're a late bloomer, because again, I think she can reach out to people of all different ages as well. Like I know I just started listening to the Silver Metal Lover, and I think it's really funny and engaging, and I don't think I would have resonated with it as a teenager. So I think everyone has different opinions and stories from her. So yeah.
Well, I was in my 20s, and so I had always thought that fairy tales were the Grimm brothers, right? That's what I grew up with, which were Grimm. But Tana took a different tact on them, and it was Tanith Lee and Angela Carter that showed me that we could write feminist fairy tales. And she's truly the backbone. She and Angela Carter are the backbone of my feminism, which is something that I really claim and cling to at this point in my life. But it never would have happened unless women like them had shown me that we could do that. We could take those stories and claim them for our own. So it was really important to me. It's pivotal in my career and my life.
Very impressive. Go ahead.
No, I would say that it's in part the age at which I found her, because I was living in a sort of very conservative, very isolated community. And so for me, my interior world is so much bigger. And for me, it was like, oh, all of this makes so much more sense to me than what I'm seeing around me in terms of the darkness, the fluidity of gender and sexuality, the sort of lush language she uses, and the fact that her writing um, is layered in a way that it's not always, if you're immersed in it, you will follow to the ending, but they're not simply presented. And so for me, that allowed me to dream and to know that like stories nothing, there didn't have to be an absolute perspective at the end of the story, which I think now that I'm thinking about it, may have to do with the fact that I'm really interested in that cognitive dissonance emotionally when I'm writing, the layering of two things that logically don't go together, but from the dream logic of the story do. And she sort of is maybe like a framework from which I built on that. I hadn't realized that till now. Anyway,